Welcome back to my library. I am back with another book review of one of the novels from my TBR shelf for the year. We've switched over to our psychological thriller genre, starting with The Missing by C.L. Taylor. This is a British author. I didn't realize that until I was a couple chapters into the book when they started mentioning London and Edinburgh and realized, oh, this is in Great Britain. Not that it's very noticeable in the book per se. The story really could be set in any sort of Western culture for the most part. The synopsis of the novel is we are following a family whose 15-year-old son has disappeared. It is unclear whether he ran away, was kidnapped, if he's still alive, what the situation is. We pick up 6 months after this event has happened. And we're following the mom, Claire, her husband, Mark, and their oldest son, Jake, and his girlfriend, Kira, as they are navigating life after this tragic, life-changing event has happened, and what it means to also have this uncertainty around not knowing if their son is alive and if he's ever going to come back. And so we see some characters trying to come to this acceptance that they will never see Billy again. Other characters, specifically the mom, having this very obsessive belief that her son is okay and that she will find him again. Even if he never comes home, she will find him and she will see him, and that will make things okay for her because she'll know that he's okay. While we're following the family, Claire is definitely our main character. It is written from her perspective. To me, it is an intriguing perspective to have the mother of the son be the one whose eyes that we are seeing through, especially as she is the character who is in some ways most impacted by her missing child. Her family is her life. She met her husband at 18, got married at 19, and then had children in her early 20s. And so she went from her childhood home directly to a home of her own with a family of her own, and that has been the bedrock of her existence. And this book is very classic 2010s. The woman does all of the emotional work for all of the men in her household. And she thought nothing bad could ever really happen to her family, and then it does, and it sends her reeling. And it is interesting to me to see all the various ways in which different characters are rationalizing their impact on what happened and why Billy has disappeared. So there's a bit of a blame game being played and a denial game being played just in the cycles of the 5 stages of grief. Like, characters are very evidently placed in certain moments along that. We have Mark, who is in this anger and acceptance type of phase where he is trying to move on. You know, he's our consistent character who's like, it's been 6 months, we haven't found anything, we have to get back to some sense of normalcy. He is a kind of stereotypical male character in that he is presented as someone who is extremely unemotional, and compartmentalization is how he gets through life. And this is just another situation in which he has compartmentalized his son missing, he's compartmentalized the dysfunction within his family, he's compartmentalized work, and so he lives in these boxes. He will open one and he will stay there and disregard everything else to oftentimes negative outcomes. But that is how he is pushing forward and trying to make himself believe that he can go back to normal and go back to routine. And that is what's okay for him. And we see Jake, their oldest son, who, from things that Claire kind of talks about and lets drop, for all intents and purposes, Jake has been the least favorite child. He's been very overshadowed by his brother, just in terms of his brother was the handsome one and the charming one and his uncle's favorite nephew. Jake has always been in the shadow of Billy, and has always been the well-performing child, and so his parents have never had a reason to worry about him. We get glimpses from other characters of Jake, and things like he's struggling with drinking, and he's struggling in his relationship with his girlfriend, and staying steady at his job, and like trying to find his place in life and trying to find his place in his family as someone who was overlooked for so many years and is now like the only child his parents have left for all intents and purposes. And he's experiencing his own guilt around Billy's disappearance, and, you know, having questions of like, could I have been a better brother? Would that have made him stay if I had just been a better brother? And then Claire, who, as I mentioned, is our focal point and our main viewpoint into the story, honestly, she kind of gets a little bit insane as the story moves on. She is the one who is continually obsessed with her son's disappearance, and it is all she can think about every day. She does bare minimum things just to function, but like, she hasn't gone back to work in the past 6 months. We see her try to go back for one day and leaves about 2 hours in. She starts experiencing some pretty serious health situations because of this obsession, presumably. So in the first third of the book, she is having a conversation with her best friend who lives right down the street, and her best friend kind of alludes to maybe Billy's no longer alive. Like, we kind of have to accept that we need to start accepting, or at least acknowledging, that it has been 6 months and your son is either not coming back or maybe even is no longer here. That really rocks Claire's world. And she ends up running out of the house and having a blackout for the rest of the day, wakes up in a motel room in a completely different town. Somehow she ran to the train station, she got a ticket, she went to the seaside village, was able to book a room in this motel that their family used to stay at when they would visit the seaside, and falls asleep presumably in the bed, and like wakes up and kind of has forgotten who she is. Ends up like kind of putting the pieces back together because she gets called by Jake, who's, you know, freaking out because they found out that she was missing. Doctors run tests on her but aren't sure exactly what happened and can't tell her whether or not it will happen again. And so she is now both obsessed over Billy and is like hearing, not voices, but consistently feels like she's seeing clues everywhere and hearing someone say her name, and just obsessed with like going through her son's belongings and trying to figure out what happened and find the tiniest clues to follow up on, because she is just convinced that Billy is out there and he's also findable. Like, what I find interesting is it never crosses her mind that maybe he's left. He's a 15-year-old boy, but even then, it's not impossible that, given this is Great Britain, right, I imagine going over to the rest of Europe wouldn't be hard. It's even possible that, you know, he could have gotten on a plane to go overseas or something. But she's convinced that he is around and he is in their town somewhere, living on the streets, and she will be able to find him and she will be able to bring him home. But now that she has these medical issues, they've now created this additional pressure for her to figure things out quickly, and another like level of fear of, she doesn't know why she experienced the blackout, she doesn't understand what's going on, she just has these very intense compulsions, and that is her life. That is what rules her life right now. She cannot sit still. She has to find her son. So I'm 160 pages into the book at this point. I'm not going to give a whole plot synopsis because honestly there's not a lot that has happened. This is a book that very much is day by day character experiences, and so there's not many moments of action that have happened at this point in time. I'm not entirely sure what the psychological thriller aspects of it are quite yet. This is a genre, as I mentioned before, that I'm not super familiar with, so there might be like very evident markings of and foreshadowings of why it's considered part of that genre that I am just completely missing and that are going over my head. Regardless, I am mostly enjoying the book so far. I would consider this a pretty classic 2010s novel, and just in terms of the writing style, we're going back and forth between, chapters with our family and then little snippets of messages, online messages between Billy and some other person who we only know their username, which I feel like is a very 2010s fiction style of writing, to use like online chat messages and chat forums to have conversations between your characters, especially within this genre. I'm trying to remember, there were a couple books that I read of what were they called? One of Us is Lying, One of Us is Next. I'll put the duology up on the screen. If I remember correctly, those books also followed this style of you were in a group message, jumping back and forth between, what had happened, like the crime that had happened, and then the present day characters' experiences. I don't have anything against it. I just throw that out there of, if that's not your style, then probably not a book for you. But I am enjoying it for the most part. There are some aspects of the characterization that are not my favorite, in terms of Claire being your very like stereotypical emotionally driven woman who does all of the emotional labor for her family, Mark being typical compartmentalization man. And I think in general their family is set up for what I can only assume is intentionally stereotypical, to focus more on the experience of grief from losing a child, the grief of losing a child and the uncertainty and the way in which they lost their child, and being able to explore those with characters who are not blank canvases, but not like fully fleshed out people, like unique people, if that makes sense. I just have to assume that it was an intentional choice by the author. That is all I have to say about The Missing at this present moment. I'll probably check in another couple hundred pages. I think I will successfully make this video the shortest book review for my TBR series at this point in time. I fully intended to check in with you all after I had read maybe another 100 pages or so, but I just finished the book. It was a weird experience of the book itself. It feels like nothing really happens, and the pacing is kind of slow, but you do hit a point where, or at least I hit a point where I didn't want to put the book down. It's also been one of the shorter books that I have read for this series at this point. I don't want to go too much into the plot necessarily in terms of a play-by-play of the plot, but I did think it would be fun. At about page 200, I made some predictions of what I thought would happen, and I thought it would be fun to go through those and then tell you kind of what came to pass and what didn't, and from there go into how I normally conclude these videos with what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about it, and what I would rate it / recommend it on Goodreads. So some of my predictions were: 1, I thought that Billy, their missing child, had run away with this person he met on this chat room. I thought for a very long time that this person he had been chatting with was an older man, and that potentially Billy ran away because he found out he was gay, like realized that he was gay and thought his family wouldn't be accepting, and like that was the route we were gonna take, of he's off living his own life somewhere with this person, this man that he's fallen in love with. I thought that that probably wouldn't be where the thought would go, just because these style of books don't tend to have happy endings, but I was just kind of throwing things out there on the page in terms of what might happen. The second prediction I had was that we would find out that Mark cheated on Claire. This one, kind of. Like, it obviously would depend on how you define cheating. He definitely betrays her in terms of, it does come to light that at one point, like the summer before Billy goes missing, Mark was in a really low place with his dad just having a heart attack, and he's struggling at work, and he and Claire are arguing all the time, and he has this moment of weakness, if you will, where he does try to kiss one of his son's teachers while they're out at the pub. It goes nowhere. She immediately brushes it off and is like super embarrassed by this thing. Mark never talks about it, never tries to do anything of that sort again. And so there's not like a full-on affair that ends up splitting him and Claire up, but there's definitely this breach of trust between the two of them, right? Claire feels, rightly so, betrayed by this, and particularly betrayed by Mark keeping it secret for so long. It does damage the relationship. It is something that at the end of the book, there's an open question about whether or not they're going to stay together because of several things that have come to light, but this being one of them, of Mark's betrayal of their marriage and their relationship. The third prediction I had was that their oldest son Jake and his girlfriend Kira were going to split up. I kind of bracketed this under maybe every couple splits up by the end of the book, including Mark, Claire, Mark's brother and his wife, and some of the other couples that we kind of meet throughout the book, some of which are already separated. And I thought, okay, maybe nobody gets a happy ending. Jake and Kira do split. They don't split for the reasons that I thought they were going to split, which I will talk about more later, because that's some of like the plot twist that I had some mixed feelings about. The last prediction I had, this is possibly an unfair because it was just a bucket, like someone dies or has something seriously wrong happened to them. We do find out, and spoiler alert, but at this point you should know that these videos kind of do come with spoilers. Billy did die. Everybody else is fine. Like, Claire doesn't end up having any medical emergencies from her fugues and her blackouts. Nobody else in her family gets seriously injured, and so they're all fine, beyond like finally finding out that their son is dead and the emotional toll that this past 7 months has already taken on them. Now there's both like closure and renewed grief that they're all trying to like navigate through at the end of the book. For funsies, I did think at one point that this book might turn into, I don't remember what the movie is called, but the one with Leonardo DiCaprio where he's on the island, like with the prison, and it ends up that it's all just in his own imaginations because he killed all of his family and can't deal with that reality. What is that called? Shutter Island? I'm probably like, y'all are probably yelling me at this point in time because I can't remember the title of this movie. I'll like put it here while editing, and I'm probably gonna facepalm myself when I realize what it's called. Anyway, I thought this book might go that route and it would explain Claire's blackouts because something so traumatic happened to her, like maybe she was responsible for Billy and missing or killing him herself, and so she's created this whole world in her head, and as the book is going on, that fictional version of her world is fracturing and she's going back to reality. I think that could have been a cool storyline. It's not the route that the author took. I was probably being a little too far-fetched in that idea of the book. Without going into too terribly much detail around the exact plot points, Kira is the other person in this chat room with Billy. Come to find out that she and Billy were in a relationship. She wanted out of it. He blackmails her into continuing the relationship. There is the night that everybody is obsessed with, like trying to figure out if it was their fault that Billy left. It's a night where Billy and his dad got into a massive argument. Claire then got into an argument with Mark. She left the house. Mark left the house. Jake's drunk. He antagonizes Billy. Billy says something about Kira being a slut. Jake tries to like defend Kira, ends up asking her if it's true. She doesn't say anything, and so he goes, shuts himself in his room. Everyone originally presumed that nobody, like, that's when Billy left for whatever reason. He just walked out of the house by himself. What we find out that happened is Kira leaves the house. We have brief glimpses into her history, and so we know her mom has not treated her very well at all. Her dad is no longer in the picture. There's mention of him dying of a heart attack. We later learned that he unalived himself. And this night, after the Wilkinson household is just falling apart around her, she really thinks that she's to blame. She doesn't know what to do except go follow in her father's footsteps. Billy ends up tagging along, forcefully so. It just inserts himself into the vehicle and goes along with her. They make it out to kind of the middle of nowhere where Kira's father used to work. They go into the woods. There's a train. That's how her father unalived himself. In the process of trying to do that to herself, there's a scuffle. Billy gets hit. Kira's terrified. She's out of her mind. Like, she doesn't know what to do, and so she just goes home. Like, she's scared of what Billy's gonna do to her. She's scared of her own desire to not exist anymore, and also her inability to complete that mission that she had. And so she leaves and has gone these past 7 months like not knowing what to say to anyone, because all of the relationship and everything preceding this event would have had to come out, and she knew it would ruin her life if that came out. And she also doesn't know what happened to Billy. Like, she has a pretty good idea, right? Very soon after, I imagine it would be hard to not realize that Billy probably got hit by the train and he's probably lying out there in the woods. She just refuses to say anything until Claire figures it out at some point, and Kira tries to then take her own life again. I was reading some other people's Goodreads reviews because I was struggling to articulate exactly why I was feeling uncomfortable with the way that the author wrapped up the plot. And there was one person in there who was very upset by Kira's storyline and the way it is presented in the book, because in their review they were talking about like this is sexual assault, and the author kind of shares the blame between Billy and Kira for what happened. Like, she definitely doesn't put it all on Kira's shoulders, but there is no acknowledgement that what Billy was doing to Kira in blackmailing her into sex with him, that is wrong in any way, shape, or form. There is not really any acknowledgement of Kira's mental health and how depressed she was, and her background and all the trauma that she has experienced. There's like no excuses necessarily made for her behavior, but there's also no grace shown for her. We find out that she was involved with what happened to Billy, and then she's just like out of the picture at that point in time. She moves off and goes and lives with a distant relative somewhere else in England and is just gone from the picture. And no other character, we don't really get to see them process through what happened. Everybody kind of just moves on a little bit, and they give Billy a funeral and a memorial service. That's it. And it is really weird to me, like, to be honest, when we got to the point in the book where the nature of these chats between Billy, and we don't know it's Kira at the time, but we get to a point where these chats start getting really uncomfortable. Like, Billy is not a good person, was not a good person, and I think that's intentional to be like, I don't think we're supposed to feel sympathy for Billy by the end. I definitely didn't feel any sympathy for this character at the end. He really was not a good person. And not just in your typical rebellious teenager, but like he was consistently vandalizing, both through his graffiti and like throwing rocks through car windows and bricks through car windows. He was extremely violent to everybody in his life. He very much coerced Kira into this relationship, knowing full well that she was dating his brother, living in his parents' home. He didn't have any qualms with doing this. And it's just very odd to me. It's all presented very matter-of-factly in the book, matter-of-factly in the book. Like, there's no judgment necessarily placed on Billy. There is no judgment necessarily placed on Kira. It's just like, here's what happened, and move on. And I just feel like it made for some very uncomfortable moments because it came across as, this is life, this is normal, none of this, like, this is all, it was very ambivalent in its presentation of this, which was a choice, is what I'm going to say. I don't particularly think I agree with the choice, and it made it difficult for me by the end of the book to actually care about anybody. At that point, I kind of, honestly, I was ready to be done. I kind of didn't like anybody by the end of the book. They were all kind of just like messed up people. I was glad to say goodbye and have them move on with their lives, even though they're fictional characters who didn't move on to have a life. But you get what I mean. Like, I was ready to part ways by the end of the book. Despite that, I did enjoy some aspects of the book. I like having an unreliable narrator. I thought it was, for the most part, a very interesting story. As I mentioned, I couldn't put it down. I think I read this in like all of 2 days, and so it was very gripping to read. There were a couple characters particularly some side characters, that I enjoyed reading and thought they were like really good friends in the story. Things I didn't like is just some of the overall themes that I think were pushed. I didn't like the idea of no family is perfect, but that being a front for some of the really messed up behavior that everybody engages in. Like, this family is very dysfunctional. Despite the fact that people acknowledge they're dysfunctional, there's also not a lot of effort to actually heal and break really toxic patterns. It would be one thing if it was like, oh, we realize that we can no longer be married and the family splits and that's their way of moving on. But there's not. It's like everybody's kind of stuck. And even though when they finally find out that Billy is never going to come back, right? And they have to face moving on with their lives now, there is never really any sort of clear understanding of like come to Jesus moment of, hey, we're dysfunctional and these are the things that we're going to work on. Claire is very much the emotional laborer of everyone in the family, and she's the one who ends up going to therapy and trying to work on herself and work through things, and that is the impetus for everyone around her also like having their secrets come to light and their bad decisions come to light. But there's never any like justice for any of it. There's never really any true forgiveness or asking of forgiveness and change in behavior in people, which is a little frustrating of like, why does Claire have to change? Like, she has been the one doing all of the work. Why is she the one who has to continue doing all the work and everybody around her continues to just get off scot-free? I could probably say more about the book, but I'm going to end it here. In terms of the rating, I ended up giving it 3 stars on Goodreads. Again, I don't think the author's bad. I think the book was really well written. I think some of the characters were interesting. I don't know if I would recommend this book particularly to anyone else. It's not going to go on any of my top lists this book is probably going to be one that finds a new home when I end up downsizing my library. But I am looking forward to reading some of the other thrillers and mystery novels that I have on my shelf. And with that, I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. And we're gonna hope that this isn't chaos. Hello, hello. I don't know where I'm gonna put my coffee. We're gonna put it behind me, which is a little silly, but it's where I can reach. I feel like I should do one of these things where it's like the book is up here. Ta-da. The missing.